Hello, my name is John Rosen. I'm an executive director with MCA Works, a marketing consultancy in Westport, Connecticut, and the American partner of ugrow. My topic today is growing a brand. And what I want to focus on is growing a brand that's a stable, solid, even market-leading brand, but not a global icon. We've worked with some of those icons, Disney and MasterCard and Pepsi-Cola and stuff like that. And they're powerful and wonderful brands that have been built up over generations, but they have a lot of resources that have resulted from that hard work over the many years. What I want to talk today about is how you go about growing a brand that doesn't have all those resources and all that heritage, but is in fact a solid and even leading brand in its category. And the key lesson we've learned over the years about that comes down to making sure you have a very fact-based, a very research-driven understanding of the needs and behaviors of every step in the purchase chain. Not just a good consumer value proposition, which is critical, of course. You must have a good consumer value proposition, but you also must understand thought leaders and gatekeepers, and importantly for most consumer products, of course, retailers. And that's the case with the example I'm about to give, and that's probably the easiest way to understand it. And this particular product category is something I think we're all familiar with. I certainly am, from every time I have to take my laptop and my briefcase to a meeting. These are called power adapters or chargers generically, but within the industry, you know what they call these? They call them what they look like. They call them bricks. They're big and heavy, and they get in the way, and they take up a lot of space and weight in your briefcase or your backpack. Just about everybody hates them. You can do all the consumer research you want to do, but you're going to come to that same conclusion. People want it smaller and lighter. They don't want it to tangle up. Now, this particular brand is Targus. You can see their brand here. And Targus was faced with trying to grow that brand a few years ago. They had achieved a neat engineering trick. They had a single brick for every laptop brand, which they achieved by having different tips. This particular tip is for an HP, and a different one for Dell, for Macintosh, and so forth. And that allowed Targus to build a universal brick for every need. Disadvantage is that their brick was bigger and heavier than the competition. The competition had a dedicated brick for Dell, a dedicated brick for HP, etc. And those bricks, from an engineering standpoint, they were able to make much smaller. This put Targus at a disadvantage with the consumer. Now, if they had stopped right there, their decision would have been, presumably, to just mimic their competition, to make smaller bricks, dedicated bricks, and then they'd have a better consumer proposition. Fortunately, they didn't stop right there, because they also spent a lot of time understanding their key retailers. These are major electronics retailers and office products retailers. In the States, that's Best Buy and Staples, people like that. In Europe, it's people like Dixon's and Conrad's. The point is, retailers don't like stocking a lot of different bricks. They don't like stocking a lot of anything. They like very few SKUs. Excuse me. So to them, to the retailer, this model was a good model because it's one model. It's one SKU. So the challenge to the engineers became, use all your powers to make it smaller and lighter and a better consumer proposition, but stick with the universal tip model because it allows us to market to the retailer with the story of a single SKU. And they did it. It took them a couple of years, but they got it right, and their brick now from Targus is much smaller. It's the size of a cell phone instead of the size of a brick. That allowed them to communicate to the retailer, only one SKU, you can have a much higher ROI, and to communicate to the consumer, smaller and lighter than we had before, still solved with tips, and as a result, even though it's not quite as small as a competition, it's small enough to be a better value proposition to the consumer, and it's universal, which is the key value proposition to the retailer. And in a category like that, having retail distribution is everything, because that means you have preference on shelf space, and that means that the consumer never gets to do a side-by-side between Targus and the competition. Main message, if you're trying to grow a brand, You need to understand the impact of your product and branding decisions on every step in the chain, and you can't undervalue any step. A powerful consumer proposition and a powerful retailer proposition, then you win. Thank you.